This year we mark 40 years since the first cases of AIDS were reported, the start of the global HIV pandemic fueled by stigma, discrimination and inequalities that has rampaged across the planet. Over this period, over 34 million people have died from AIDS-related causes and 77.5 million people have become infected with HIV. Today, 37.6 million people are living with HIV. I am one of those people. I received my HIV diagnosis through a routine immigration test in the USA. It didn't cross my mind for a moment it could come back as positive, but the doctor, barely able to look at me, shuffling paper, said, "The good news is you don't have syphilis, but the bad news is you're HIV positive. Oh, and you have about 7 years to live." My children were 5 and 7 at the time. I didn't think I would live to see them grow up to be men, but I have, and have had 2 more wonderful children born free of HIV. The reason I am still alive is because of the tremendous advances in science that have given us an arsenal of tools to tackle the HIV pandemic. Highly effective combination therapy means HIV is no longer a death sentence. Many of us can expect to live as long as anyone else, and those of us on effective treatment cannot pass HIV on to our sexual partners. HIV treatment dramatically reduces the risk of passing on HIV to our babies. Today we have PrEP, medication taken by those not living with HIV to prevent infection, and very soon we'll have long-acting injectable PrEP as well as long-acting injectable HIV treatment. But these advances would not have been possible without the tireless activism often led by people living with HIV, combined with policies that follow the science, not get hijacked by ideology and political expediency. HIV activism, emerging from the unremitting deaths to AIDS, public and government indifference and crushing stigma, changed policies and has had a lasting impact on biomedical research. Throughout the pandemic, HIV activists have brought around real change. However, it's not just the science, policies and activism that keeps me alive and in fact enables me to thrive, not just survive with HIV. It's also where I live, my economic circumstances and my ready access to empowering information. The situation is dramatically different for many people living with HIV globally. In 2020, 690,000 people died from AIDS-related illnesses and 1.5 million people were newly infected with HIV. Today, although 75% of all people living with HIV are on treatment, 25% are not. That's 10 million people. 47% of children do not have access to HIV treatment. In 2021, we live in an increasingly fragmented world fueled by inequalities, including between countries and indeed also within them. Women continue to be disproportionately affected by HIV. In sub-Saharan Africa, 4,500 young women are infected with HIV every week. We women with HIV face intersecting forms of discrimination, stigma, criminalisation and gender-based violence. We've seen violence against women during COVID-19 lockdowns spike by up to 500% in some countries. Key populations, including men who have sex with men, sex workers, people who inject drugs and transgender people, are being increasingly penalised in some countries by harmful state criminalisation of behaviours that not merely seem to be stalling the response to AIDS, but actually setting us back. It was the UN high-level meeting on AIDS last month that happens every 5 years to look at the progress that have been made and make resolutions about what must happen next. At this high-level meeting, however, for the first time in UN history, such a resolution was adopted by voting, not passed unanimously, with 4 countries voting against it, breaking consensus on issues relating to human rights, harm reduction and law reforms. The COVID-19 pandemic has shone a light on existing inequalities and have made them worse. As we contemplate in the UK if we'll be given a booster COVID vaccine later in the year, with my children in their 20s now being double vaccinated, many of the most vulnerable and healthcare workers around the world are yet to have a single dose. With an aggressive wave of COVID-19 surging across the continent, it's shocking to think that only 1.2% of people in Africa are fully vaccinated. The UK alone has administered nearly twice as many jabs than the entire African continent, despite its population being 20 times smaller. I spoke to a friend in South Africa today who said she really thought we would have learnt the lessons from AIDS in the COVID-19 response, as we're a global community united and connected, but instead we're seeing vaccine nationalism, with countries looking out for themselves, seemingly turning away as others die from COVID around the world, and it's shaken her faith in humanity. COVID-19 is threatening to reverse years of progress from the HIV response. For example, across facilities surveyed by the Global Fund across the world, HIV testing fell by over 40% in 2020. COVID-19 seems to have also diverted attention away from HIV, along with funding, expertise, and healthcare services. Even within rich countries, we're seeing shocking health inequalities around HIV. A study by Dr. Rageshri Dariwan and colleagues in London showed that racially minoritized people with HIV in the UK face significant barriers to testing, taking treatment consistently, and staying engaged with care, linked to structural racism and social and economic disadvantage. So what can we do now to effectively unite policy, science and activism and try to hit the UN targets to end AIDS by 2030? Firstly, we need to ensure that we follow the science, ensuring that the results of scientific research inform policies, not get sidetracked by ideology. UNAIDS research shows that countries with progressive laws have better outcomes against HIV, whereas countries that criminalise same-sex relationships, sex work and drug use have significantly more people with undiagnosed HIV and lower rates of viral suppression. Evidence shows that countries with human rights protection in place are doing so much better in tackling the HIV epidemic. The struggle for LGBT equality is integral in the struggle against the HIV epidemic. Activists need to fight to change the homophobic and stigmatizing laws, armed with the most effective weapon, scientific evidence. Similarly, we need to fight to stop harmful and discriminatory HIV criminalisation laws and policies. Scientific evidence proves that criminalisation is a direct threat to the HIV response. We cannot turn away from injustice. We cannot be quiet, as at the start of the HIV pandemic, silence equals death. The evidence shows us clearly that inequalities are driving the pandemic. As the UN Global Strategy sets out, we have to end inequalities to end AIDS. The human rights of all has to be at the centre. We need to ensure that the best scientific advances in HIV reaches everyone who needs it, regardless of where they live in the world, their economic circumstances, and who they love. The COVID pandemic has shown us what is possible where there is political will, driven by a desire to protect public health. It's also shown us the ingenuity of the community who have delivered medicines, testing and outreach services door to door. We can certainly learn from COVID-19 and adapt our approaches to HIV and harness public attention on these public health issues. We cannot get sidetracked in the fight against AIDS. We cannot end AIDS until we end inequalities. Women and girls continue to bear the brunt of the HIV pandemic. We remain underrepresented in clinical trials despite being disproportionately affected by HIV. Scientists, you need to do better in recruiting women. In fact, also make a bit of space for the research we are leading on and the policies we are looking to create. Gender inequality and gender-based violence continue to fuel the HIV pandemic. Policymakers do enforce laws to protect us. Activists fight alongside us for our rights, but do not think that we women with HIV are passive, voiceless victims. We, like all people with HIV, must be at the centre of any decisions about our lives. Our care and treatment must be person-centred. And please, no more tokenistic engagement with us. We need meaningful involvement at all stages of research, policy, service design and evaluation. Nothing about us without us. Yes, the scientific advances are wonderful, but we need to ensure that people with HIV are armed with the information about the science and about policies that should be keeping us safe. Knowledge truly is power. Clear, accurate and reliable information needs to get to all people with HIV so we can make informed decisions that are best for us. When I was diagnosed with HIV in 1998 and given misinformation from a doctor about my life expectancy, it was NAM aidsmap, actually where I work today, that gave me the accurate information I needed and continue to do so as I made decisions about my treatment. Digital devices and platforms can be enormously helpful in empowering people to look after their health, but we must bridge the digital divide and ensure governments recognise the importance of internet access in public health. We must also ensure that all communities can benefit from the results of science. It was incredible to see COVID-19 vaccines produced in record times, and how IAS 2021 has highlighted a promising pipeline of new HIV technologies. But if all communities can't access the results of science, then their public health value will be significantly limited. UNAIDS have reaffirmed the target to end AIDS by 2030. It is certainly an ambitious target, but I do believe that it's possible if we effectively unite science, policy and activism, and importantly, have sufficient funding to bring about significant change. A young poet living with HIV, Bakida Cassada, performed her poem "The Years Flow Through" about the AIDS pandemic at the launch of the UK AIDS Memorial quilt display this month. A stanza haunts me. Who has the freedom to be, to claim their humanity, to define themselves? Funds withdrawn, reallocated, reminding us that progress can slip away. As we stand here 40 years into the AIDS pandemic, we must not allow the tremendous progress we've made slip away. But time is running out. If we act now, in finally ending inequalities together, we can be the generation that ends AIDS. Thank you.